Welcome to this edition of Cup Chat with Birding with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. Today we're excited to introduce our special guest, Dr. John Tomachek, one of our wildlife extension specialists. Today we're going to be talking about birds and hunting and how that ties together in a conservation effort. Good morning and welcome to everyone to Birding with Texas A&M's AgriLife Extension's Cup Chat. We are on most Wednesday mornings at 7:30, so we're excited you could join us. My phone just popped up a notification that we are live. So joining us today is special guest Dr. John Tomachek, and of course Dr. Maureen Frank is with us as well. And we are going to be talking about hunting. It's kind of an odd topic for Cup Chat, but we're going to be talking about hunting as a conservation tool for birds. So Dr. Tomachek, give us a little bit of history about yourself, what you do with the extension. And we know that you and Maureen are kind of have the same title, but y'all definitely take different parts of the states and things like that. So I'll turn it over.
You bet. Thank you, Emily. It's a real pleasure to be here. As y'all probably know, I watch this most weeks, and so it's fun to be on Cup Chat. I even brought my Texas A&M AgriLife, I'm getting blurred out, my extension mug. So, So
fancy. What's your pet today, Maureen?
It's camo because we're talking about hunting. I don't know if it's going to show up right. So Emily, John, camo is Emily's favorite. If you ever find a cute camo t-shirt, you should send it to her because she loves camo.
Deal.
I love a camo. And I'm in the classic to-go mug.
Hey, that's perfect.
County agent, ready to go.
I'm in the Walmart brand, so.
Oh,
I just figured that's a dent on your mug because it fell off your truck at some point, like mine. So
no, but okay. So here's my free 30-second commercial. We have to stop. Sorry, this is why I love Cup Chat and there are no rules. So cleaning a Yeti lid is disgusting.
Yes.
Does everyone know out there that it's a magnet and you can wash underneath it?
And
see, Maureen, that's the same face I had about 20 years ago. Not really.
Wait, Maureen,
not too long ago.
No, I didn't know that.
You have a PhD, how do you not know it's a magnet?
I never sat there and fiddled with washing it and it fell off the other day.
So
because mine is not, I don't usually use that one. Mine is my, what brand is it? It's the one that one of my friends gave me when I finished my PhD, and it's not that kind. Phillips is that kind. And so when I do wash it, I'll just kind of curse about it. And I didn't know how it worked.
So I will tell you, I learned this when I was on the road to an extension program and I had like a 6-hour drive and I was just fiddling with it in the cup holder and it flipped off and landed under my seat. And that's how I learned about it. But I'll also say, Emily, removing that rubber gasket is a really good idea in cleaning under that.
Yes. Well, and those that know me know that I'm not a huge germaphobe, wash things wonderfully kind of person. So I will say my coffee cup is probably not the cleanest because I do a Maureen's cringing. I promise at Birding with Extension programs we are so sanitary. But I'm a horrible just rinse and reuse.
Well, there you go. No, I get it. I say I have a patina on my coffee cup. It's a patina.
Exactly.
So guys, you got exposed to me already. So I'm Dr. John Tomachek, as they said. So with Extension, I'm an associate professor and an Extension wildlife specialist. I am based in College Station, whereas Maureen is based in Uvalde. We have the same title, and we cover different parts of the state geographically on general issues of wildlife management, but we specialize in different things. As y'all have probably known, if you've ever met specialists, we even have our narrow things that we do differently. Most of my work is on wildlife damage management, wildlife disease management, carnivore management, that kind of stuff, which often comes out to be kind of the doomier, gloomier side of wildlife that doesn't make people smile as much, a lot of conflict. And then also do a fair amount on hunting and that kind of thing as well. And really as it relates to consumptive use of wildlife. So that's generally who I am and what I do for Extension. We do a tremendous amount of outreach on those topics, but here's a little different today, right, Emily? Because we're talking about birds. Wow, birds and bird conservation.
Yes. So, but not even just that, we're going to talk about birds and hunting and conservation all in the same mindset. And I think that that's something that kind of we can all have a little bit of a mental hang up on. Oh, you know what? I realized I forgot to plug my light in. I look like I'm in the dark, everybody. I'll fix that for y'all while I ask my questions. But so we kind of have this mental hang up that, we can get this mental hang up about hunting being a bad thing because we're taking something away. Explain the concept of really why hunting can be used as an effective conservation tool. Tell us why it works versus some of us in our mental capacity kind of getting bogged down in the fact that we're taking something, it can't be conserved. It can't aid to that conservation.
Right. So that's great, Emily. And I like to remind people that words have meaning. And those of y'all that know me are like, oh, good, he's going to get off on a grammar or language kick now. But the real deal here is the word that you used, conservation. So conservation doesn't mean preservation, right? Preservation means we never touch it. We never do anything with it. We don't manipulate it. We just leave it alone. Versus conservation, which means we're going to try to hold on to as much of it as we can for as long as possible, but while still using it for something, right? That's the important key part here. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is thinking about what's the resource we're using and what's the world it lives in. There's really no part of this planet anymore that hasn't been modified by people in some way. So we imagine this ideal system that works and Mother Nature's got it, and Mother Nature's incredible, but a lot of those pieces in the system don't exist anymore, right? In a lot of areas, large predators that were there, they're not there anymore. We used to have grizzly bears in Texas. We don't have those anymore. We used to have black bears all across the state. We don't have that anymore. We used to have gray wolf. You don't have that. So hunting as a conservation tool, sometimes on a biological level, the take is helping us manage populations to take the peaks and the troughs out of that population. Everybody's like, well, the peaks sound really great, right? Got a whole bunch of something. They precede the troughs because we run out of food and it craters. We try to manage things such that we got great habitats. We're growing those animals, but we're keeping those numbers down so we don't ever strip that habitat down. And we can balance with other management needs or uses. Okay, great. That's one side where hunting helps us biologically. So that's all assessed by population estimates and surveys and good science from our agency friends and our researchers helps us figure that out. But the other side of why hunting really matters, and guys, it always comes down to your pocketbook, right? How are you going to pay for this stuff? Science is expensive. Management's expensive. People like to hunt, but something's got to pay for all that. This country, we're truly blessed because we have a suite of laws that address not just vertebrate wildlife, stuff on the land, but also fish that are the Wildlife Restoration Acts, right? We refer to Pittman-Robertson. Those were the two congressmen that sponsored the Wildlife Restoration Act in 1937. That's a big deal. It's a big deal to have a law that took 10% off the top of all the sporting arms and ammunition sales in the Great Depression, because people said, this is important. We got to pay for this somehow. Okay. And they decided that those people that were using the resource ought to be the ones paying for it, because that makes sense. I don't want to stick somebody with the bill that's not using this thing, right? So that created our suite of conservation tools, which hunting provides most of the funding that goes into conservation. So that money comes in, and forgive the analogy, it's kind of like a football team at a university that brings in a whole lot of money, and other sports at that university may not bring in as much. And so some of the football team's money helps out those other sports, right?
Yes. Not throwing any rocks, are we?
No, I'm talking about the university I went to, which does not use maroon as a color. That's the thing, right? Sometimes that bolus of money, our game animals are doing fine. We got plenty of money to pay for that. We sometimes use that for other things. And then your license sales on hunting licenses make up the rest of that funding that pays for your Texas Parks and Wildlife, your other state agencies. That's how we pay to get conservation done, is with hunting dollars. It doesn't come from anywhere else.
Now, I hate to jump back to your little football analogy. Didn't you come from the University of Texas?
I sure did.
And I guess you were there, and I hate to go down the football rabbit hole. Were you there in the good era of Texas football, unlike it is now?
Oh, I was there when we won the Rose Bowl.
And yes, that is a rock. Absolute rock. Where your football team is at this point in time.
Oh, trust me, this is like asking the win-loss rates for the UT A&M game. Let's see, A&M always lost at UT and lost half the time at home. That ain't good. But the nice thing is football teams change over time. Remember, I grew up near Waco, and when I was in school, in high school, we used to refer, if you got beat really bad in football, we'd say you got beat Baylor bad.
Yes, I remember those eras.
And then somewhere along the way, Baylor turned into a good football team, and it's like, what happened? So things change, and that's okay. I'm just excited, Emily, if we end up playing the UT A&M game again, I don't care what side you're on, it'll be nice to play the game again.
Sure.
I agree with that as well. I'm down with that.
I have, as a true, deeply devout Aggie, I don't know that the hatred is so deep down low that I don't know that I can say the same thing.
Really? Because Aggies love traditions, and that's
I'm confused by this.
It comes from we're getting way off topic, but it's
way off topic. We might want to.
We may want to divert.
Wait, come back in. I'm going to pull y'all back in, even though I'm also an Aggie. I'm going to pull y'all back in, and we can divert on this later.
Welcome to the SEC. Have fun.
Oh, it's like A&M's first couple years in the SEC, right? It was it's hard to move up to the big leagues.
Except that really nice LSU game that wasn't there. But anyhow, okay. So, I want to ask a question about, so you talked about the Pittman-Robertson Act and that happening during the Depression. And it was, I think some of what we retain today as our perception of what hunting does to wildlife, it's amazing how some things last, because we have a perception of what was done was over 100 years ago that some of those populations were decimated, and it was bad. And so it's good that we remember how bad that was, because we almost lost bison and white-tailed deer and turkey and all kinds of stuff. So it's good that we retain that perspective. But here's my question for you, is when that was happening at turn of the 20th century. Sorry, I was about to say 19th century. Turn of the 20th century, there were all these species that had been overhunted. And so we started making regulations, and the conservation became so important because we had seen what unregulated hunting had done. Who decided? How do we get to decide which species were going to keep being hunted and which species stopped? Because I don't know if we've talked about it on here before or not, but there were species hunted for feathers for ladies' hats, like things that we would think is crazy to hunt today. People would have like a warbler on their hat. We don't do that anymore. So who decided that it's okay to hunt turkeys? It's not okay to have a warbler on your hat. How do we get to that point?
So that's a great point, Maureen, and I'm really glad you brought that up. And I can even make a segue from our football analogy if I try really hard enough. So
that's why we love to have you as a guest on Cup Chat.
Well, that's because I like to chat with y'all. So remember that just like whether or not a football team is good, game animals are a matter of dates, right? So if I look at the same team in different decades, they may be terrible, they may be great. With game animals, and I tell kids this in my college class that I teach, game is just a matter of dates. Did you know robins used to be a game bird? Yes. A long time ago. My great-grandparents loved robin soup, and I'm not going to incriminate anybody or myself, but they loved robin soup during my lifetime. Okay, they're long since gone now, so that's fine for me to say, but I asked them why, and they went, well, we used to hunt robins. It was a big deal, and that was really exciting, kind of like dove poppers, right? Imagine 70 years from now, doves are not a game animal for some reason, and we're all talking about how great dove poppers are. We would sound crazy to kids. Okay, so part of the things you talk about in the late 19th century, early 20th century, we had this growing kind of first wave of conservation. We've had other movements since then, but this is kind of the first great awakening of conservation in America. And it really was with the realization that a lot of these animals that we thought were limitless were on their way out the door, and people started realizing it. So you mentioned things like white-tailed deer. Most people don't realize whitetail were almost extinct. And that's crazy sounding, but they were almost extinct before the 1920s. And so around the early 20th century, we had a bunch of laws passed that were trying to cut down on this crazy unregulated take, things like commercial take of animals for feathers or their whole body, or commercial take of meat. So you go to the restaurant, right? You order venison, some kind of venison or whatever. It's not whitetail. By law, it's not whitetail. It can't be, because that's a native game animal. You can't sell native wildlife. You can use them under permit, but you can't sell them. And it was to cut down on that crazy unregulated take that funded the ladies' hat industry, that funded the restaurant use of native wildlife. And we made a decision as a country to say, no, we're not doing that. So the Pittman-Robertson Act that really put a bunch of money into it came as, I view it like the cherry on the top of all this, or the keystone. Because in the 20s, a lot of state agencies, many people don't realize this, state agencies were already trying to restore game animals on their own. Parks and Wildlife at the time was the Game, Fish, and Oyster Commission. Enjoy that one. But the Game, Fish, and Oyster Commission had a series of white-tailed deer and wild turkey movements, reintroductions in the 20s. And there's maps of those available to see where they did it. But the point was they just didn't have the resources to do as much as they wanted to. So you get to the end of the 30s and we start having this money pouring in. So how do we decide what was game and what was not? People took a hard look at what could bear hunting and how much hunting could those populations bear. We don't look at an individual animal level. We look at population to go, are we going the right direction? If I'm going the right direction, we can take some off the top. That's fine to finance this thing. So in many states, white-tailed deer weren't hunted again until the 60s or the 70s. We talk about the first modern deer seasons in a lot of states. Texas, we're really lucky because we did that a lot earlier. But in many areas, your turkeys, your deer, a lot of your big game, they weren't hunted again until the 60s or 70s. But I tell you what, the folks that built these laws were really wise, because at the time, those were the animals that were in peril of going away because of overuse, right?
Yes.
But now the shoe's on the other foot. Bobwhite quail at the time, super abundant, super common. That was the everyman's game animal. Nowadays, that is not true at all. But the same tools that protected turkeys and deer back then are protecting quail now.
Well, and so one thing that makes me think of, and you wrote an article, you were featured in an AgriLife Today article a couple weeks ago about dove hunting.
Oh, yeah.
And so not to bring up all of that, but if you want to learn a little bit more about what Dr. Tomachek has to say about dove hunting, check that out. But, think about it in terms of our dove population. We have legal game dove that are eligible for hunting, because of those numbers, like you said, where we can take some off the top and be fine. We have unprotected species that take all you want because they are a hindrance. And then we have protected or non-hunted species of dove here in Texas. And so explain to, I guess, my next question is, maybe it's a little weird, but what would Cup Chat be without a weird question? If, is there a species out there today of our feathered friends that needs help in terms of the conservation aspect, that if you could wave your magic wand and make a game bird for conservation purposes, is there one out there?
I don't know that I would do that. And the reason I say that is because and this is not just a plug for our regulatory agency friends, but our state and federal wildlife agencies do a really good job on that stuff. And they're pretty darn proactive. I'll give you an example. When I was in college, you could still hunt prairie chickens in Texas. It was still legal. And they only took a few a year, and they were on a handful of private ranches, and the agency knew where they were and knew who was taking them. And why did they continue to allow that? If you know anything about prairie chickens, guys, and if you're birders, you probably do, that sounds stupid that you would allow the hunting of prairie chickens that right now are candidates for listing under the Endangered Species Act. But the reason they did it was because those birds were on those ranches, and the folks that were managing the hunting and the habitat had such a good handle on how things were going. They were very conservative and they self-regulated in a lot of ways. So it wasn't necessary to tell them this can't be a game animal anymore. They, in fact, finally closed hunting of prairie chickens because the landowners that had the birds asked for it. And so when they came to the Parks and Wildlife Commission, the commission said, naturally, you're the people that control the resource. Science tells us this. We agree. We'll close it. We have most animals that can bear hunting are open right now for hunting. And if they're marginal, usually we'll get to you can hunt them over here, but not over there because this population's not doing great, but this one's okay. I don't know that I would take anything that I can think of off the top of my head and make it a game bird right now.
Would you take a game bird away?
Ooh, that one's a thorny subject. I will tell you this without naming species. I've worked on some before that are currently hunted. And I worry that although they're doing fine in some places, I worry that there are areas that we either need to not hunt them anymore or we need an incentive program. We need to go to the landowner and say, if you're making good habitat and you got buku of birds, I'm going to let you hunt. I'm going to let you take this many this year and really incentivize that creation of habitat and that protection of the species, as opposed to it's functionally unregulated, do what you want. Not because I don't trust people to manage themselves, but I worry that as things tip on the scale and populations start that downward slide locally, I worry sometimes folks don't realize till it's too late. And that's not any slight on them. That's just going, hey, it's not your job to know this. But I'll give you an example. There's little things that I teach landowners to do. I worked on bobwhite for a number of years. So even though I do carnivores and stuff like that now, I actually started in bobwhite quail. And I tell landowners every year, learn how to age a quail in hand in terms of look at its feathers and whatnot and decide if it's an adult or this year's young. And when your hunting bag becomes more adults than juveniles, you need to stop hunting because you're cutting into brood stock and you've already outstripped the number that you grew this year. It's not a precise thing. It's not something I'd go publish in a high-end journal, but for a landowner, it's an easy way because the quail season's 6 months long. It's functionally not regulated. Quail relies on self-regulation of birds on that property by the landowner. So we give them a metric. You're halfway through the quail season and you start seeing that you're cutting into just adult birds, go ahead and cut it off. Go ahead and stop hunting for the year. And that's a really hard pill to swallow, but a lot of successful landowners that make big money on quail hunts do that already themselves. So Emily, I'm a little fuzzy on that one because I think there are tools we can use to kind of limit hunting. And remember, we've been using the same tools to manage hunting since the Old Testament was written. I kid you not. Most of those tools are literally in the Old Testament. So it's limits on season, limits on bag limits, limits on means and methods, right?
Right.
So what I wouldn't do usually is make an animal not a game bird anymore. Mm-hmm. What I would do is change up means and methods. If I wanted to take a cut down on harvest, I could say something like, man, I'm really worried about quail. You can't use shotguns to hunt quail anymore. You have to archery hunt quail. How many birds would get taken? None. But
and yet that would be fun.
It would be.
I could not. Okay, I could not
My
go.
patience level could not handle that.
But you think about folks. My predecessor, Dr. Dale Rollins, who some of you may know, big on quail. I have never been in the field with him that he wasn't hunting with a 28 gauge shotgun. And why does he do that? Because it's challenging and he's not worried about killing birds. He wants to enjoy his hunt. You enjoy the act of going, the act of being in the field. Sometimes it's not as much about the take as it is the experience, right? Or Mr. Chip Ruthven, who runs the Matador Wildlife Management Area. I watched Chip hunt with a black powder shotgun one time. That was fun. Those means and methods we can adjust. We can adjust season lengths, bag limits to cut down on take so that we're taking care of populations before we actually cut off hunting altogether, which I think is usually not the right way to go unless that species is in such bad shape, we've got to cut it off.
Gotcha.
Well, and I want to say something here just as far as kind of another important thing of hunting and why it can help us with conservation. First, I have to make a little side note. Many of y'all know that I'm originally from Colorado, and so bobwhite quail is not something that live up there. So it's not something that we hunt. But my father will hunt grouse with a bow and arrow sometimes, and it's just a challenge, and it's just something kind of different. And they're just so everybody's clear. if you could hunt, if we were going to hunt quail with archery, I am not prepared to go do that tomorrow because I have a lot of practice to do. And I think that's something that's important to share about hunters and the hunting ethic is, you don't take shots unless you're confident in your abilities. And so I would not go archery hunting quail now, but man, I would try that sometime. Just like I've always wanted to go bow hunting for carp in places where carp are invasive. And that was a thing in Utah. And I just never did it. But that sounds like, shooting fish with a bow and arrow off the back of a boat while they're jumping up in the wake sounds like about as much fun as you can have. But
yes.
Wait, we've got a few questions before we jump to the next question. I have a few questions.
Well, okay, wait, hold that because I have a comment for John, but I had a feeling we'd have some questions. So just comment on what John was saying and why else I think that hunting can be really important. So talking about those things and how that's something that I really enjoy. And I mentioned that my father hunts. And so another really important aspect of hunting of conservation and something that I like to talk about that helps me tie together the different things I do, because I work on hunting and hunting with kids and also non-game species, is that if we don't have an experience with nature and with wildlife, we're not going to care about it. And this is something that I think a lot of landowners see. And, even as birders, as recreationists, you probably can think of, those people that they just don't care about nature. And in part, it's because they've never experienced it. And so there's different ways that people like to interact with nature. Some people like to bird, some people like to hunt. And we know that hunting is not damaging our populations long term, and in fact contributes some really good things to the management of those populations. And so for people to get that opportunity to hunt and to have that connection with the land is so important in making sure that they continue to care about it and continue to be involved in it. I will be more involved in, I care more about, say, legislation that has to do with hunting or management on my own property that has to do with hunting than I do about certain other things because I've had that experience with it. So I think that's another thing that's important as we connect birders and hunters is recognizing that a lot of hunters, they don't care if they go home empty-handed at the end of the day because they spent time with family, they spent time with friends, they were outside, and it's just one of your favorite things to do. And that's the main takeaway. Just like you might go birding and you're trying to find some species and you didn't see what you hoped to see, but you had a fantastic day, right? Like nobody ever goes birding and then comes home and was like, well, that was a waste of time. It's always a good day birding. It's always a good day hunting. And those connections that people have, I called that earlier the land ethic, and that's based off of an essay by Aldo Leopold that's fantastic. And if you haven't read Sand County Almanac, go buy it after we finish this and read it because it's fantastic for conservation. But the land ethic talks about that we will not care about nature and we will not do anything to conserve nature unless we care about it because we've experienced it. So I think that's another important thing, aspect of hunting. And I knew we'd have questions, Emily. So
as Emily's preparing those, I'm going to add one little thing real quick. Right on, absolutely. And the other thing, guys, if you say, well, what about endangered species? There are many endangered species that were listed under the Act, under Endangered Species Act, the day it passed, that are now game animals and in fact considered nuisance in many areas. Alligators are a great example. Mm-hmm. How did we get there? Because the folks that wanted to hunt alligators, raise them for the meat market, is a little bit different on alligators. You can actually raise them and sell them, complicated laws. The people who wanted that had an incentive. So the government said, nope, there's very few left, endangered species, but if we can recover them, we can go back to normal. Got it.
And it was fast too with alligators. It was like one of the fastest recoveries ever.
Because we had tons of habitat. Yeah.
And do y'all remember the show? What was the show about hunting alligators? Oh, come on. You too. Oh, yeah. It's hysterical.
What are you talking about?
I got nothing. Sorry.
There was a show about hunting alligators. And it was like a huge hit.
Talk about Crocodile Hunter.
No.
Crocodiles.
No.
Okay.
No. It was in. I'm gonna have to do the Google. Hold on.
Okay. Well, give us a question while you're Googling it.
Get us going on a question.
I know it's 8:00.
What is the regulatory agency that deems species can or cannot be hunted? So is that a Texas thing, like the Texas Department of Wildlife, or is that a U.S. thing? Give us all of that.
Yeah. Like many things, your answer is yes. So if it is a species that is non-migratory, right? So it isn't listed under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, then it is state managed. Texas Parks and Wildlife in Texas gets to decide, just like New Mexico Game and Fish can decide, or any of the others, right? And this is an interesting thing because sometimes you get states coordinating when they don't have to, because they recognize they've got a population that spans a political boundary. So they'll coordinate and work together even though nobody's making them. The things that are listed under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, or if they're Endangered Species Act, any of those federal laws, especially the ones that enforce international treaties, then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service gets to decide seasons, means, methods, whether or not it's open or closed for hunting, that kind of thing. And remember, if you're curious what actually is a migratory bird by definition, there's a list we call 10.13, which is the part of the law that has the laundry list of birds. It's almost everything. There's just a few species that aren't on that list that the state gets to manage.
Gotcha. And then the other question we have was, can we be from Jenny is, can you introduce pen-raised quail and make them wild if you have the habitat? And I think that's a question. I'll let y'all tackle it. I'll just stay on this side.
I'll go ahead and tell y'all, no. And we had a series of experiments that were actually run out of the
Uvalde. Legally, can you?
Oh, legally, yeah.
Legally, yeah. Here, yeah. The question needs to be twofold. Legally, yes.
Legally, yes, but here's the deal. The most important thing we're looking for whenever we move birds or conserve quail is we're trying to see how many of those birds survive to the next breeding season and successfully raised a brood, right? Because that's all we care about, because quail don't live that long. Here's the hitch. There was a study that was done by Dr. Jim Cathy and Dr. Susan Cooper at Uvalde, 20 years ago now. And their estimate was it would take 10,000 birds to get one to survive to the next breeding season. So boy, that's an awful lot of money. But the other problem with it is that when I dump out a bunch of birds in a hurry, I chum in all of the things that like to eat quail. And I probably increase the predation pressure on the few native birds I've still got, if I do have any, way too high. So I hate to say it, but it's really more of a, if you build it, they will come. You want better habitat. And if you've got that, quail have got a capacity to expand a population by 800% a year if there's habitat that they can fill.
Yeah, that's a question that we get a lot. And it's, people, really good scientists have tried so many ways to get those birds to live longer. I mean, decades of research of trying to figure out how to make it work, that if you put pen-raised quail in the field, you'll get a better outcome than what John just shared. But it just doesn't work. So yes, legally you can, but if you're thinking about, I love to talk with landowners about, everybody's got limited resources, everybody's got limited time and money. Where you invest that matters. So just because you can do a management practice doesn't mean that's going to be the best use of your efforts. And so if you've got time and money to spend with pen-raised quail, I'd devote that time and money, like John said, into building better habitat, and your dividends will be much better.
So one thing I will add, guys, and you're probably now scratching your head if you've been paying attention, because there's a mixed bag of regulations on what you can and can't do with native wildlife. You can't sell those. Well, you can sell those. You can't move those. Well, but those you can pen raise and release. So for example, you can't pen raise and release wild turkeys. That's illegal. But you can pen raise quail and do whatever. Okay, this is why you need to visit with your friends at Parks and Wildlife or your state wildlife agency if you've got these kind of questions, because it is kind of a weird landscape based on tradition and laws. So why can you raise bobwhite and let them go? Because we've been doing that since the 1700s. The British, before this country was independent, the British figured out how to captive raise bobwhites. And they're really easy to captive raise if you've never done it. That's why they're used for so many research studies, scientific laboratory studies, et cetera. Most of your chemicals that you use, they use quail to assess the lethality on birds because they're easy to raise and easy to use. Okay, we're really good at that. We've been releasing birds to hunt them for years. My point is this. If the British could have captive raised quail and let them go in places that they already didn't have them, they would have done it, just like they did with pheasants. We have pheasants worldwide because the English, during their time of great empire, took them from China and moved them all over the world because they loved hunting them.
And you know what's delicious if nobody's ever had them before? Fried pheasant. That is, I will take that over dove poppers any day of the week.
I do
So
believe
good.
you get deported for saying that.
I know. I figured I'd toss it out there. But again, I'm not a native Texan. So when I say things like that, nobody can get too mad. You can just blame it on the fact that I wasn't raised here. So.
Yeah.
Well, I don't love dove poppers. They're too. Here's the problem.
She is a native Texan, so she's going to get in trouble
so
here.
much work for just a little snack.
That's why you need to be killing Eurasian collared doves, because the breast is twice the size of our native birds.
I'm not saying I can't, but still, just a little snack and so much work to get the little snack. It's kind of like crawfish, but I love crawfish. Crawfish are so good, but so much work for just a teeny tiny little snack.
But if anybody wants to know how much Emily and Brian love me, after birding the border, when we went to go scout out Long Acres Ranch, we had Cajun for dinner one night, and I was wrangling the baby, so my hands were full. And Emily and Brian got the crawfish for me because my hands were full, and so they were doing that work not even for themselves.
And I'm a good crawfish peeler. You are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you have that ice chest at the end of the evening that has to be peeled, I'm the peeler. Mm-hmm. I don't mind doing it, but it's just my little fingers get sore and tender. It's just,
Do you know, Emily, you just described a great ecological concept called optimal foraging theory. You're saying I have not met the trade-off of how much food I'm having to I can get in this hand for how much work I'm doing in this hand. It's not an even balance, right?
Yeah.
Actually, an optimal foraging theory would be a good cup chat topic. I'm going to write that down, and we may have to have John come back and talk about that another time, because I am aware that it's well after 8 o'clock.
Or I keep going all morning. Or
are we surprised?
You could get Dr. Pianka, who is still very much alive and was one of the guys that co-authored that with his grad school advisor. Dr. Pianka is a professor at the University of Texas at Austin.
Oh.
But no, he's just a treat.
That would be fun.
Okay.
Yeah. Because optimal foraging theory.
I can't spell his name. So you write that.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yeah, Pianka.
But I got it.
Next week, we have Dr. Clint Bull. We are going to be talking about raptor behavior. So we're excited to talk about that. We're going to be kind of bringing in some ID points with Dr. Bull. He's up at Texas Tech. So we're going to go through all of the Texas universe. Well, I guess there's more, but the 3 main ones. Not to discredit anyone who loves all the rest of them, but
there's awesome bird people at all of them that all do different things. So y'all have got such a slate. Clint Bull is one of my favorite people. So I'll be tuning in and very excited to hear what he has to say.
Well, and we'll be very birdie next week, just because I know we have, what did we do last week? We weren't very birdie last week.
We have the native plant challenge. We have to draw.
Oh, we do have to talk about that. Okay, so just so you know, Emily and I try to connect things to birds in a very broad topic, but I know sometimes we're more like true birds and birding than others. Next week's going to be very birds and birding for anybody who prefers that. But if you prefer this and topics that are just kind of tangentially related to birds, let us know in the comments, because we are always looking for ideas for Cup Chat, and we're always happy to go whatever direction y'all want us to go. So
you haven't asked my favorite recommendation for birders to go see a bird in Texas.
Oh no, we haven't.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. So remember, much like Maureen is a native Colorado, and I'm a native Texan. I'm a 6th generation Texan, but I spent part of my growing up in New Mexico. And one of my favorite birds that we had where I lived there, that we also have in far west Texas, is Montezuma quail. Now, they're not a game species, even though they're a quail, and Montezumas are one of my absolute favorite birds ever, because they live in a very specific habitat at a very specific elevation. And so there's only a few places in the state you can go to see them. And I strongly encourage anybody that's got the time to go out to West Texas, the Davis Mountains, the Chisos Mountains, the Christmas Mountains, anywhere that you can got Montezumas. And boy, eBird's great for finding out where people have seen Montezumas on public land. I really encourage you to. Their plumage is incredible. The behavior is incredible. They're just a neat bird.
That's an
Oh,
awesome recommendation. I love those guys too. And it's something that we've tried to see during birding the border. We've got a couple properties that potentially have them, and we haven't found them there. But as you go farther west, you are more likely to. And our Rio Diablo kids saw some, right?
no.
Or did they not? They did not.
No.
Okay.
No.
We'll have to come back and try that again next year.
Bird. Now we do
They're very elusive.
We are working on a partnership cup chat program with Quail Forever soon, and they're going to try to provide everyone a few tips and tricks to seeing the Montezuma, but they would like to tell everyone that it is a challenging feat as they are a very elusive bird. And, and I think that's an interesting point, which we are well over on time, but because they don't flush, it's like traditional, like quail, bobwhite flush, scale quail flush. Those Montezumas aren't going to necessarily flush. They're going to duck down and be harder to see. So we're going to maybe talk a little bit about Montezuma behavior when we have those Quail Forever guys on here shortly. So here, John, since you are on 2, 3, 4, I need a number. We had lots of comments last week, but only 7 individual people commented. So
I need a number between 1 and 7.
1 and 7. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no decimals, huh?
No, please. That'd be challenging.
3.14.
Yeah, let's do 5.
Allie is our winner. So I will be messaging Allie to get her contact information to get her a native plant cup. So super excited for Allie. Few last minute reminders. Registration for Learn to Bird is open. Go get registered. We have a few spots left for East and a few spots left for West, but those are filling up quickly. So get on and register if you want to be a part of those. We only take 15 birders, and we have to have a minimum of 10 for those programs to make. So just a few spots left open for those. Any other? Oh, Dr. Clem Bowl next week. And happy Wednesday. We are 15 minutes over our time, so we hope everyone has a great week.
And happy first day of fall, because the weather actually, it doesn't feel like fall, but it cooled down a little bit. So everybody have a good first day of fall.
It'll be hot again tomorrow, guys, I guess. Well, I don't know that, but in Texas, really, does the first day of fall really mean anything? You Coloradoan, it's not.
No, no, it doesn't. But the absence back home are changing. So.
All right. Well, everyone have a great week. Thank you, Dr. Tomachek, for joining us, and we will see y'all next Wednesday.